Hello and welcome back to another video here focused on distance education at Lake Tahoe Community College. Today I'm addressing the topic of a basic Canvas shell. And this video really is developed through a goal of trying to answer some instructors' questions about what exactly should I include in my Canvas shell. This is particularly important if you are teaching in Canvas for the first time. You've gone through the training, you were approved, you got some great tips from Trevor Thomas or me or other faculty coordinators involved who are experts in DE instruction and Canvas, but you really want to know, what should I include in my shell? What are some of the basic things I need to have? So this video is really focused on a desire to answer that question about what should go in my Canvas shell. So as we think about some things to include today, I want to say that you should always rely on your department for advice. None of us who teach in all disciplines, and so I can't advise you on teaching mathematics in Canvas or statistics or psychology. I only teach Soc and Anthro. So really rely heavily on your faculty colleagues who've already taught online. Get some tips from them. Look at their Canvas shells. Request to be an observer in their Canvas shell, and as such it allows you to go in and see the basic foundations of that class shell, how they interact with the students, their teaching approaches, and so forth. So rely on disciplines and departments throughout your journey in DE and Canvas. And some of my disclaimers on this: by no means is this a prescriptive list. I'm not trying to tell you how to approach your shell. I'm not trying to infringe on your academic freedom. I'm not trying to tell you that I am the sole expert on DE education or teaching in Canvas. Canvas is so interactive, immersive, and expansive that there are opportunities for all of us to learn continually, even if we've been teaching 25 years or so in the discipline as I've been teaching, or if we're a first-time instructor. I think it's an opportunity to learn some new tricks. So I'm not trying to prescribe to you, these are the only approaches and you need to follow this. That is by no means what I'm suggesting here. There's much variance related to the subject that you teach, and that's why I said initially, really rely heavily on your departments. In my new role as faculty chair of teaching and learning, I'm going to hopefully liaise with our department chairs, instructional deans, to really say what you do in your face-to-face ISP or DE class is really dependent on the discipline in which you teach. And the department chairs and the faculty in those disciplines know best in terms of what makes the most sense for our students, whether it's a face-to-face DE or ISP class. So really a lot of variance, so I can't cover everything, but I'm just trying to show you some basic foundations of Canvas. As I just mentioned here, consult your department, other faculty about what to include in Canvas. For example, if you're teaching in world languages, and if you can connect with Kata and Sarah, our excellent full-time faculty members in the program, they've tried a lot of these tricks. They have a Canvas shell that they've set up, and over multiple iterations of teaching that same class, we change things around. Maybe we're bringing on new open educational or zero textbook or resources. Maybe we're adding a new approach to video. We're using some new apps in Canvas that worked really well. Or conversely, we tried some apps out in Canvas in the past and they were a disaster. The students didn't connect with them. The performance wasn't good, the learning outcomes were not met, and so forth. So rely on your departments and other faculty experts to really see what works best in your programs. I'll now go through some basic foundations for your Canvas DE class, and as I'm doing this, I'm going to do some cutaways. I'm recording the cutaways at home through my screen capture technology there, so I can show you hands-on what's really going on. So the first thing to talk about is the need for a basic architecture in your Canvas shell. And this is like a building, right? So if you walk into a building and the signage is good, you know where the restroom is, you know where the cafeteria is. We all had our first experiences on our college campus being lost and asking someone. And nowadays there's a GPS-enabled app for this, so some of it has gotten, I think, a little bit easier. And even with that technology, sometimes we still get lost, even with our Siri device that gets us from point A to point B. So this is really that metaphor. It's thinking about what to give your students in terms of virtual signage and architecture and space, if you will, that prevents them from getting lost in the class. So let's jump inside Canvas now. All right, as we jump into a Canvas shell here, we can look at an example of how we might think about our class through this idea of an architecture. So if you think about a traditional class where you have a traditional syllabus, you walk into that class on the first day, you hand that syllabus to the student, you walk them through the architecture or the structure of that class. It usually will have things like dates, due dates of assignments. It will have extensive information about grading. It will have all of your class policies listed, as well as other tidbits of information that generally relate to students understanding what they have to do to be successful in your class. So in that sense, the online class is not different. All of us need to have a syllabus in our online class. There's a lot of variation in what that looks like. Typically, it's like signage. We're trying to tell the students how to go from point A to point B. So if you start and you're teaching an 11-week class, in the first week you give them information to be successful, and as they progress through that class, through each of the weeks and through the final exam and into the 11th or 12th week of the quarter, they then are able, based on what you present in your Canvas shell, to have a clear sense of what they need to do to be successful. I say throughout this video that I think it's very important to be redundant in your syllabus. I think some faculty might disagree with me on that, because I think the feeling might be that it's too much information, but we really do need to have this information for our students, again, to guide them through the class. So obviously your contact information, your email, your phone information, if you have office hours, you could include that. All the foundational stuff about the class. This is like showing you what the class is all about. So the course description, the student learning outcomes. So that really gives them a sense of the content and what you intend that they should learn about. Going along with that, there might be a textbook. And in the case of this class we're looking at, it's a zero textbook class. So the readings are at the bottom of the screen or at the bottom of the syllabus. I put in quite a bit of policy information to give students a sense that I do not allow makeups unless there's a medical reason. I talk about online classes and rules and so forth. So that information I think can go in a variety of different places. And in terms of redundancy, I typically will have what's on my syllabus repeated as well in my modules. And so starting at the top, I might describe to them how to get started in the class, a little bit about me, and then take them through the policies. Let's jump back to the syllabus. I'll come back to the modules in a second, talk about those, because I think it's one of the best opportunities to create an architecture, foundation, or structure in your class. Now, as the student is scrolling through your syllabus, likely they'll come upon like grading information. It will detail the grading rubric or score. If you have rubrics in your class, those might be embedded within your assignments or your discussion posts. What I try to do is lay out for every week exactly what they need to do, how much each of those assignments is worth, and so forth, and then give them a total at the bottom. I also try to tell them that they should go to a particular place, in this case, the Discussions tab, to start on their work. And that's another part of that signage to really show the students where to go next. You can do that pretty effectively with modules. I do have a rubric, and I mention it here, so that gives them a sense of maybe what to expect as far as the discussions. I also have the quizzes listed here. And again, in addition to saying about the quiz itself, I tell them how to get started, the points, and everything like that. And then I start here, and I have the topics and readings for the class, starting in order. So I start with week 1, week 2. If there's a reading, I will typically tell them to go and get that in the Files tab in the class. I know some of you disable your Files tab. There's a lot of variance in how we all approach this, so that's certainly fine. I also include then any media here, and it's very easy then, because all the student has to do in terms of your architecture is say, okay, I know for week 3 I need to go to this part of the syllabus, I know what readings are here, and then I can easily click on the videos and watch those. And that continues all the way through the end of the class. And another way that the students get a re-emphasis, if you will, of what the expectations are in the class and every single assignment that's due is under the course summary. And so you have the discussion post, the student introduction post, and then the 3 quizzes they complete. So this is a nice way for students to see the due date and also the time and so forth. And again, this redundancy is built into Canvas typically if you have it included, if you have a syllabus, of course, and it's also going to come up on your modules. And then some of the other tabs, if you use assignments, it will appear there, depending on your assignments, and of course discussions as well. Some of the other things in Canvas, and I have other parts of this video that I'll talk about what's visible or not visible, but you may have some of these tabs disabled, so it's not necessarily going to look this way. But I think Very important, of course, to have the syllabus to lay the foundation of what's in the class. Many of you also use announcements, and I'll talk about announcements later in this video as a way of stressing how to also add to that organization and structure on behalf of your students. But we can look at the modules themselves. Now, some of you would say you have it actually set up to create a prerequisite, and so in some cases, if you do that, the students won't be able to view things. You can also decide on the order of things. So in this particular case, what I'm trying to do in terms of my virtual signage is to show them first, here's how you get started. It's the very first thing they see when they click at the top of modules. And then also they're going to hit the policies too. And this is something I want in the first part of the class, because if they don't know my policies in week 1, it's really all for naught if they read those, later in the class and there's some issues. In this particular case, because there isn't a prereq, but I would almost like one, I give them some background information on sociology that they can choose to look at, and it's just a video I've shared with them. Or actually a series of videos here that I've recorded. And then what happens is it's very logical, so it starts with week 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way to the end of the quarter. And so my idea behind this is that we go sequentially, so they should get their modules sequentially. Not all of you may do that, and if you have your own version, it's perfectly fine. Again, I'm not trying to be prescriptive in this video. This works for me, though, because the students can see what the focus is for the week, the objectives, the readings. They see what's due in terms of their discussions, and then I have introductory videos, and for me, this is part of the architecture. I record videos for each of my classes, and in this way I'm taking them through either the chapters or information in the class. I really strongly recommend a welcome video, a video that welcomes your students to the class, because this will actually do some of what I'm talking about. And if you check out my welcome video here, you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm walking them through the class. So I actually go through all the architecture, if you will, all the foundations, the signage, to tell the students how to navigate the class. This is one of the most effective things you can do, I think, in a DE online class. So definitely consider that as part of your architecture for your class, and I will have some additional videos coming out later about making your own videos. So this will maybe be helpful for you in terms of future efforts to create your own class intro video that takes students through the signage and gives them the wayfinding and directions in your DE class here at LTCC. Now, part of that architecture, I think, really is how you have your modules set up. And let me say in terms of this, there's a lot of variance in how people do modules. I may do modules by week. So if I'm teaching a 6-week summer class, week 1, week 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, some people like to have modules more based on big chunks of content. So I'm not really going to say that one's an advantage or disadvantage, but the key is to have a system that works for you and explain that system to your students. So let's jump in Canvas. Okay, so let's take a look here at how you might approach your modules in the class. As I've been saying in this video, this is not prescriptive. It won't necessarily work for you in terms of how you focus your assignments or how you like to organize your class. So there is no one-stop shop for all things Canvas, and I think it's really important for you to discover some of these things on your own, as I did over the many years. So I'll show you my modules, and it's one suggested approach. You could take another approach, certainly. Now, in addition to modules, of course, you want to have a very detailed syllabus. My personal preference is having the syllabus on the home page, but I know quite a few other instructors who prefer other things to appear on the home page. And of course, you can customize that by choosing your home page right here on the right of your class. I'm doing this in instructor view. Of course, if you do it in student, it will look a little different, but let's click on modules. And my idea behind this is I feel like students will generally sequentially move through the class from top to bottom. This isn't always the case, and you could use alternative approaches to this, as I'll perhaps show you in a little bit. So the way I have set up is at the top of the page, I have my most pertinent information, and this refers to just getting started. So the student will read the syllabus, look at some of my introductory videos, and these take students through using Canvas and threaded discussions and the like. I'm just clicking next here to see what these intro videos are, or not intro videos, but modules. So this has my biography. They can watch a little short video that introduces students to the research.
There's also a class intro video, and this typically is the video that is tailored to the actual class, whereas those other videos you saw were very specific to using Canvas. And then some of my policies that I like to include about late assignments and things of that nature, a doctor's note and so forth. Having my academic and dishonesty plagiarism policy here, and then some information about technology, so Canvas introduction, tech and computer resources, online learning resources. So I think for me, what I'm trying to do initially, and actually as you saw there, I was actually moving into my second module, but my first module is getting started. So these are the most important things, and then once they watch these, then they can go through my policies. So this has everything you saw there, including academic dishonesty. I talk about word count, I offer a conduct code, I state my response time, and I include DRC accommodations. And I feel like policies work well in one area, mainly because the students understand A, that there are policies, and B, because they have that in their mind, they're then thinking through all the various rules that they need to follow in the class. Now, depending on this information, and again, you might structure it differently. You might have something else up here, you might have this called introductions or something like that, and this might not necessarily be called policies. So it doesn't really matter, but I think what's nice about the module structure is that it allows students to move through the class, and in a sense it's their blueprint to understand how to complete work in the class. Again, every instructor does it differently. Some instructors, as we get to the actual work requirements here, structure this very differently from one person to the next. So I'll talk about that. But let me just mention, so I have this here, and because this is my deviance class, I want students to maybe have a little background in sociology, so this talks about that kind of information. And then we get into the work. In an 11-week class, what I like to do is have a module for each of the weeks, because I think it's very clear. For week 1, you have certain discussions, for week 2, and so forth. Generally, in my classes, each week is very similar, except when you get into various exams or quizzes. But every week there's a discussion. That discussion is exactly the same. The readings may vary from 2 chapters to 3 or whatever, but for the most part, each of these has a very, I would call it symmetrical focus, other than when you get into a quiz. Now, some exceptions might be in week 1. I want them to do an introduction post, so I have that as an extra, essentially, as compared to future weeks where they just do their weekly discussion. So week 1, they'll have introductions and a discussion, and then week 2, just a discussion. So for me, it's also very important, and Canvas is really nice. You can rearrange things, so I can move things like this, but this is maybe my anal retentive personality, but I like to have, for example, my focus first, followed by readings, media, discussion, and then quiz comes next, as you see in week 3. So what I would do is, when I set this up, it kind of depends on how you create pages. I generally will go to the page creation tool and create all my modules, unless I'm importing from a previous class. And then after I do that, I might set up my weeks here, where again I just add a new module, I give that a name, and then if I have to rearrange some things, I move things around. But I like how in Canvas you can very easily drag and drop and move things. And so for me, it's nice to have symmetry and clear representation for the student. This is one of many places where they can click on the assignment that's due, in addition, say, to clicking on their discussions or their assignments. Now, as I'm not going to steal stuff from the other part of this video, but again, what you see on this sidebar is also going to vary based on what you have included in your class. You can totally customize that. It's totally up to you. So for me, the modules, I think, just offer a sense of organization, clarity, and architecture, as I've been mentioning in some other sections of this video. The other thing I should mention, you're going to see here that you won't see, that you may see in other classes and you won't see in some classes, depending on instructor preference, is the prerequisite requirement that you can access by clicking on any module. So we'll click on this one, and what I'll do here is hit edit. And this is where I can set the lock date. So if I want to, I can choose a date, unlock it then. If I want to really mirror, so if week 1 starts in September and it goes until September something or till October, and week 2 is in October, I can set those dates to have the students work at a pace that I choose. I personally don't do that. I am okay with students working ahead for the reason that if they're doing my discussions, they might be adding some great comments that allow that conversation energy to develop a little earlier in the next week of discussions that sometimes is a little hard to get going, and I sometimes have to push it along and so forth. And you've probably experienced that in your own class. What I could do here is also add a prerequisite. So in other words, if I had something here like policies, and before the students go to sociology background, I could then say policies is a requirement. Again, I'm on week 1, bad example, but I could choose this and then say until they do that, until they click and read through that information, they cannot even access week 1. And if I do that for all subsequent modules, the same thing, right? I could sequentially say week 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for each of the weeks prior or ahead, and then that way I can kind of control the pace of things. So that's a prerequisite. I can also add a requirement, and the requirement might be they have to go through in sequential order. Okay, so that's one thing where you go in order, which is real nice if you set it up this way like I do. They just have to work through things in order. So this week 2 will not open up until they finish week 1 because of the fact they have to complete things in order, which includes an introduction and a discussion. If I have a quiz, that as well. Or I could choose something a little more variable. Student must complete one of the following requirements. They could complete this plus contribute to the page, or mark as done, or simply view the item. So it's really nice in Canvas that you can add requirements or prerequisites as a way of controlling the flow of traffic, if you will, in terms of what you've set up. So I really encourage you, as you think about your modules, again, customize it as you like, but for me it's about organization and clarity. Now it may also be for you a third thing, which is the control of flow. So controlling time, controlling when one thing is done, controlling when someone has access to something else. I don't do it that way, but I know a lot of my colleagues in the business world, for example, at the college do that. So it's best also to talk around broadly, talk to other instructors in your discipline to see how they approach things. So one other thing I should mention as an option for your modules is you could actually import from the Canvas Commons, and that's often very handy. Now I should say that some of this you're going to locate will be very specific to certain topics. So for example, if I type in one of my disciplines, anthropology, I can see quite a bit of information that loads up here. So in some cases it might be something that is useful for me if I want to import something that is actually very content specific. Now another way to do that is to go to the filter here, and you can sort this by latest, most favorite, most downloaded. You can filter this, and what I would recommend is to take out, obviously if you're teaching college, you don't need any of these, or graduate, so you might just click on undergraduate. That will go from 66,000 results to about half of that. And then maybe I just want to, I can look at courses to see what courses have been developed. And in some cases, you could take an entire class, incorporate that into your shell, and then modify elements. And that's one nice thing about the open source approach to this. I could also just choose, say, the modules, and then having the modules might also allow me to bring something in. Now, so far I don't see anything here that is maybe useful to actually like setting up a course architecture. I have seen in the past really good examples of this. For example, this one here is a course. It's not very complete, but if I like the organization of this, I could download it. And in most cases it has dummy text, and then what you can do is just edit the information and use it as you like. But I've seen some other really good templates that you can download that are actually like very graphical, and an example of that is actually here our own Canvas certification. So some of this you could certainly do with if I go to edit the page, you'll see maybe the information. Some of this might include images, and you could certainly do that. They might also have these almost like tables included here. So there's a lot of different ways that you could graphically create this in Canvas. So some classes will be preset for you to do this, and then what you could do is just import that into your class if you find a format you like. And this is one, for example, that shows you the different stages of the training that you're doing, and it's all done on the first page versus, as I was showing in my module design, having the students primarily do this through the modules. But this has a very similar approach as well if you just look at how organization is established here. And this is not established, by the way, by weeks, because if you do the Canvas training at LTCC, typically we're not having you do it over a period of weeks. So it would make sense in this case to have it structured by weeks. So again, more options if you want to import information or modules or entire classes from the Canvas Commons. It's a good opportunity to take advantage of some of the open pre-created resources out there for you.
Okay, next we can talk about having some pre-class settings. And by this, I mean you have everything established before the class starts. That way, when the student logs on for the first time when the Canvas shell is opening, they don't see a blank Canvas shell, or they don't see just a few paragraphs of text that say, hey, the syllabus isn't done, and so forth. Now, I realize sometimes it's a challenge for you to have everything up and running. I fall into that all the time, and sometimes I say to the students like a week before class starts, I'm adding more to my Canvas shell once I'm able to do so, and then hopefully by the night before I have that ready to go for my students. But having some pre-class settings, I think it's an opportunity for you to give stuff to your students so that they can be proactive as a good student in your class. So let's jump in Canvas to look at some of those.
Okay, in terms of pre-class settings, of course, one thing to think about before a class is published, and generally you will get a reminder from the DE coordinator about this, but you should go to your settings page and click on this information here, and there's some variation in how you can choose whether students can only participate during the start, in between the cycle of the start and the end dates, and also can they participate before or after. Generally, we recommend that you don't allow them to participate after the end date because the class is over and you may have like deleted some things and it won't give them like the full impression of what you had set up, say, before. So this is something definitely to look at. And then also, as you know, there's that, I call it a quirk in Canvas, where you have to set the dates here and click also at the top on section. If you have more than one section, this will vary. And then hit edit section. And then you have the information here as well. So those are the two places to set dates. That's like kind of key. The key is to have your class published, and of course when you start your class, if you're in the home page and you don't see it here, but you'll see if it says published or unpublished at the top. And of course, if you don't have your class published by, we like to say at least the night before classes start each term, whether you're teaching for us in fall, winter, spring, or summer. If you don't have that ahead of time, then I think really students don't have an opportunity to be proactive, read your syllabus, figure out what textbooks they need, any other materials, and so forth. I personally like to have my online classes at least a week before classes start, just so the students have ability to get the information. They can, in this case, look through my syllabus, see all my policies, my grading, all the readings, my videos, and so forth. So you get that overview early on if you open your class early for your students. I think that's key. Now, some other pre-settings may relate to some policies you have. Again, this may vary. You might have information here on your syllabus, your rules. You might have information about plagiarism. I generally have a module set up, and I recommend this structure if you're interested as well in following it. So you create a section that says policies, and this will have everything that includes your plagiarism information, any policies about late work, word count, conduct code, response time, DRC accommodations. This way, this is set up to the student ahead of time. And it's really key. Do not include this information, say, at the bottom of your modules, because the students, if they're just following along sequentially as in the manner I have the class set up here, by the time they get to that, they may never even see it. Now, a proactive student will look at everything, but it's not necessarily the case with all students. Again, if you want to set a requirement for your students to see your policies ahead of time, I recommend that. Go to Edit, add a prereq, or do a lock situation where you could lock it, and then the students have to progress through sequentially, starting with your key policies, say at the top of your modules page. Or you could have that information presented somewhere else on the page as well. It really does depend on how you want to organize it. So that's just some general tips here as we think about some of your pre-class settings in your Canvas shell.
Next, we have to ask what is visible to our students. And this simply refers to, do you want certain features to show in your Canvas shell or do you want to hide those from students? So let's look at some advantages and disadvantages of different settings jumping into Canvas.
Okay, so in this section, we're looking at, quite simply, what the students will see when they log onto your page. Again, I think you know that if you begin your class, one of the best places I like to start is the course setup checklist. This will tell you all the things you need to start the class. So you could import content, you add your assignments, add students, which typically your students are pre-filled into your roster. If you want to add guests for evaluation purposes or training, you would possibly use that under the People tab. Add files to your course. If you import your content, often the files will import over. Your navigation links, a course homepage, which is really key. What do you want to see, the students to see in terms of logging on initially? Calendar events, TAs, publish the class. So this is a handy place to begin, and that allows you to set things up. Probably the next step then is you will choose your home page. You might have already done that on the setup page, but again, you can choose it here: activity stream, course modules, assignment list, or syllabus. And so for me, I like to have the syllabus as the first thing that students see. And if you want, we can launch the student view. This is always handy when you're proofing your class to see what students will actually see. Anything that has a due date that isn't open yet, of course, under student view, you won't be able to view things. If you click on grades under student view, it'll actually block you from doing that because you're just testing it as basically that test student that you often see on your People tab in the class. So you'll notice right here, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 links. They're all in black. If I leave the student view, you'll actually get 3 additional links. And these are just links that are, or tabs if you will, that are disabled for the class. So since I'm not using them, the students will not see them. The way to do this 100% of the time is go to Settings. And as you're accustomed to, a lot on the course details page is the basically when a class starts, anything you want to add about a description and so forth, an image for the class. And then we also have talked about this Sections tab and why that's important for setting your dates. You could also click on feature options. This is a lot of customizing if you want to try out the new gradebook or dashboard images. This is really about customization. Apps, we could install new apps if we wanted to and use those in our shell. But this is really the key one. So click on navigation. What's nice about this is I can drag things. So if I want to move quizzes there and I hit save, then now quizzes appear here. And it's entirely up to you. I actually like modules next because I think it gives them the basis of what they need to know in the class, and so I will just rearrange that. This is totally preference. If you work on this in your class, set it up how you want. There aren't any rules necessarily about this. Now, if you only had, I can't imagine under 10 tabs, it just would be very difficult. I know some of you don't include the files or the pages. The reason for that, I was talking to a few colleagues in the business department, they want the students to go primarily to the modules. And so if you have the pages open, and you can look at that, it's unsorted. It's generally alphabetical, or it could be, yeah, I think in this case it's alphabetical. I was going to say it's by creation date. I think you can adjust that from latest to earliest and so forth, and also the last edit. So then you could actually click on any pages that you're working on that you edited that you need to go back and check. And again, right here we can publish and unpublish. But this is not going to give the students much to work with. So I believe some faculty have chosen to disable and make this Pages tab invisible for that very reason. Likewise with files, some faculty feel that the files could be linked, and I certainly do that within my modules, and as a result, the students don't need to be poking around in there, because if they are, they're not going to see any rhyme or reason to it, and it might be confusing. If you want a student to read a certain chapter at a certain point in the class, the way to control that is through modules and pages, which are, in a sense, the subsets of modules themselves, which are the higher level organization of your class. So just to sum up, we would go to our settings and click on navigation, and we can drag and drop to get the order of this as we like it, and then anything we don't want to appear will be dragged down here. And as you can see, these are all down here, and as a result, They're not going to show up in the tabs when students navigate your class.
Okay, moving on, we can talk about the syllabus. The syllabus is that boilerplate document that you have for your students to make sure that they know exactly what they need to be successful in your DE Canvas class. So let me show you my syllabus here in Canvas as a sample of some ideas.
Okay, so we can take a brief look here at what you might include in your syllabus in Canvas. And the disclaimer on this is similar to the disclaimers I've offered on the other content sections. There's so much variation in this just based on who you are, how you teach, your discipline, and so forth. And so the key is not necessarily to follow exactly what I have here, but to see if you have the structure, the key pieces, and so forth. There's going to be a lot of variation, and so I think just to look at this as a basic model is really my only point in this. Keep in mind, when you go to your class, you're going to typically see the syllabus here. You can change the order of that, and I've chosen the syllabus to be my home page. Again, that is through the Choose Home Page by clicking on the syllabus tool there. If you click Edit, you get the syllabus starting at the top. So this is where I would put information in related to the class, and I would maybe include images as well if I wanted to do that, and I've included some videos. So I'll just show you how this works. I model this really based on my in-person syllabi. So at the top I have my contact information, including my email. If I have office hours on campus, I have that there. I next have the important videos I want the students to watch. So here's how you get started in the class. Here's how we focus on sensitive topics and conversations. Here are my class policies. And then after that, introduction videos. So you have to go through all this until you get to the main information in the class, and that's kind of strategic in my mind because I want students to learn about my policies. I want them to use this information to understand how to work through Canvas and so forth. Then I have additional policies. I have my course description, transfer information, objectives or student learning outcomes. Those are always key. I then might have things like my disability accommodations. I might talk a little bit about technology, online classes, and so forth. And I have to say, in a lot of classes, I cut and paste these, I add new ones, I move these around based on issues that I see coming up in the class from time to time. So there's a lot of variation in this that you will probably note yourself. I then think it's important to establish the deadlines, and probably I should have this bolded, Saturdays at 5 p.m. for my discussions. And then I have the grade distribution. This tells them what they need to do every week. I cover the exams, and then I talk about the grading information here. Then I have additional policies, word count, extra credit policies, conduct code, and so forth. So that's really part one of the syllabus. And there's a lot there, and I've made the point in this video that I believe in having a very exhaustive syllabus. And the reason for that is if there's ever a grade challenge or a dispute, a grievance that a student files, you will have backup in terms of having all the information in your syllabus. If the student is disputing something about the grading system and you don't have a grading system on your syllabus, it's going to be a very hard grievance hearing to affirm the rights of the instructor for the main reason that you don't have that information in your syllabus. So it's very important to have that. So this is part one. It's about the class and really the policies and the grading. Part two, I have all the topical areas organized by week. So week one, the topics, I have any of the readings here, and then I have videos as well. And in many cases, there's a paralleling of what is going on in the video and a discussion. And in some cases, I will mark readings or videos as core, indicating that they're testable for the quizzes or exams in the class. And I just want to scroll through this, and you'll see it's very, very, very extensive. And for the race class, I was very heavy on the materials because I really thought it was key to give them a broad basis for understanding issues in the class. Very extensive. They didn't have to read all these, but they were there as options. So when you get to the bottom there, you see it takes quite a while to get to the last week, to week 11. And then typically at the bottom of your syllabus, you have the course summary as well. So I think the key is, again, the variation will happen from discipline to discipline. The key is to have something very comprehensive, to lay everything out for the student, and to try to answer as many questions as possible within the syllabus component when the student logs on to the class.
Again, It's only my syllabus that I showed you there. I wouldn't say it's the right approach. It's one approach. One thing I will tell you though is that you should have some key areas laid out in your syllabus. You should have your grading policies. Have your instructor contact such that students know how to get hold of you. They understand maybe how long it'll take to have an assignment graded, when they expect to receive the work back. Have your student learning objectives established. Let your students know the work requirements, how often they have to log in, and what exactly the assignments are. And by all means, stress the policies. Go through the college catalog. Focus on the disciplinary procedures. And I've done some other videos on this, but in particular, I really advise you to look at the student discipline procedures, student conduct, which is located in our college catalog. Typically it's in the first, around like page 40 or so. This changes every year, of course. But having that established early on prevents some of the issues that sometimes come up in terms of student behavior. Please, please, please look at my recent video on student behavior. It's linked here for you to see. It's also on my DE playlist. I really recommend you take a look at that, because a DE classroom can have multiple behavioral issues that you often need to address, and one way to address that is on the front end, establishing to your students your policies and procedures in terms of expectations about discipline and behavior. Campus information. I think campus information is very important to include either on your syllabus or to include somewhere in your Canvas shell. We can jump in Canvas and look at that.
Okay, so we're back looking at my current website here in spring of 2019. And in terms of campus information, I think that my personal sense, just in terms of my own site, my Canvas site, is that I don't have maybe enough information about campus. So one thing I do have on here is information about our Disability Resource Center. But I think it could be interesting as we think about guided pathways and building some of these efforts out, is to create maybe a little more sense of virtual community in our online classes. And so to that end, this is really just almost a reminder for me to build out some resources or to be part of that conversation. So when you go to our LTCC website, of course, there's a lot of information about programs, information about, say, expansion of the Promise program, student housing solution, and so forth. And so what I'm hoping to do in the future is to really feature more of a virtual experience of LTCC, of our students, of our various campus offices. I'll be doing actually some of these initiatives in my new role as Faculty Chair of Teaching and Learning. So I guess I would just say today there's more to come on this, but I think one thing you could think about is including in your website information that's most pertinent to your students that connects back to campus information. Some of this could be redundant, I'm not sure, but for example, if you wanted to include more about your program, you could have links to degrees and certificates. You could have links to the schedule of classes and so forth. So things to think about in the future, but just as a reminder of maybe some things to come, I would just say that in the future, hopefully we'll have a better ability to share more of that virtual experience of LTCC with our students.
Again, just giving students an opportunity to know everything, where the DRC Center is, know where the library is, if they're an in-person student, or even if they're virtual, how to contact certain offices. Giving key resources to your students is always a good idea. We can jump on the Canvas to look at some of those.
Okay, so as we think about resources that we might include in our basic Canvas shell, I would say they fall into three categories. One would be technological resources that give students information of a matter that relates to the class, navigating the class, and so forth. The second would be, I want to call it like campus information, but keep in mind we're operating in a DE format. But it could be things like office hours, it could be the DRC, Disability Resource Center accommodations, and so forth. And the third thing would be disciplinary content information, such as links or videos or additional information, including readings that direct students to how to find something related to their discipline. So to start off with that second area, the campus resources, if you teach in-person LTCC in addition to teaching DE, you might include your office hours as a resource. You might also help your students through by talking about certain things through your announcements function, so you could do announcements in the class in such a way that you inform students about some resource that's available. I think the biggest one is the DRC accommodation here. or Disability Resource Center services. In this case, I give them just the stock paragraph that we have from our campus website, and then if you click here, you go to the DRC site at LTCC, and you can see the information there. So that's pretty important because there are cases where you maybe have to change your testing accommodations or the time afforded to students based on a verified disability through our DRC center on campus. So those might be some of the resources that you include that relate to, say, spaces on campus or information that is relevant to the institution itself. It might also be resources like the last day to drop the class with a without a W on the transcript or something like this. And this is going to vary from class to class and person to person, so it's kind of hard for me to establish anything that is absolute in terms of what you might include. So I'm jumping back a little bit because I've changed how I've used just some of the resources within Canvas. So this is an example of having information for the student that is disciplinary in nature. So I might have discussion ideas for the students. I might also have, as I just mentioned, links. And links can be very effective because they can expand on the learning by taking students to external pages. So in this case, I have it set up by the chapters. I have some videos available, and you'll notice something here actually. This happens all the time. If you have a class from one quarter to the next and you give students resources that might change or go inactive, as this is indicating with the gray image here, then that can be a challenge. Now, with something like a TED Talk, those probably are fairly stable, but you can definitely go into your class under settings and you can look at the validate links in content. And we won't do it here for our class, but if I did it, I might actually see that a lot of those are invalid. And it's a great way to work through your resources in terms of using your link validator. I really recommend that. Again, find that under settings and then click on the right-hand column here and validate links in content. So that's actually pretty handy. So again, I think depending on what you teach, the discipline, you might have those resources included. It could be part of a module, it could be announcements, it could even be a resource here on the side. And since I'm mentioning these, this would be the third type of resource available. So you'll notice there's a lot of variation when you log on to one person's class to the next in terms of what is available here. This is all customizable. And I think I'll save this because I have another section called what's visible to students, but I'll save it for that. But what I want to say is that this is where you can choose the resources that you want your students to see. So for example, name coach pronunciation. This is something that maybe helps you or your students with pronouncing your name. So what I could do is click this and record my name, and that way the students see how I pronounce my name. So it's something maybe very handy. If students need access to free 365 Office, which is available to them free, which is Word and PowerPoint and so forth, they would click on this. They could also click on this Online Readiness Quest for Success, and it helps them maybe with being prepared in an online class. And so I think, again, there's variation in terms of what you're going to include for your resources, but just keep that in mind and decide which of those resources that you wish to use when you think about creating your Canvas class.
And then wrapping this up, and again, some of this information I just gave you, like with resources or campus locations, that could be a module, that could actually be a page, it could be part of your syllabus. There's a lot of variance in terms of how people choose to do this. But by all means, have the syllabus or some architecture, your modules or pages in the class, announcements, to be very exhaustive. If we have issues down the road with a student discipline hearing or a grievance about the instructor or about a grade, we always look at what's in the Canvas shell. We always look at the syllabus and the information there. If you don't back yourself up, if you don't give a policy on late work and a student wants to get late work and you don't give that opportunity to them, and then they appeal the grade, often our hands are tied in terms of what is on your syllabus or present in your Canvas shell. So to be exhaustive and to be a little bit anal retentive about what you include, I think really behooves you in terms of the future and possible situations. Standard core elements, we've actually talked about Scott Valentine and some other full-time faculty on campus in our faculty training days have talked about whether or not core elements will be included as part of your basic Canvas shell that Treva gives to you either as a new instructor or when they populate your classes with your rosters, if you're a continuing instructor with a new class in a particular term at the college. I think the concern always is we don't want to suggest to you that there's a right and wrong way to approach your class. Again, I started this video off by saying I don't want to suggest it's prescriptive in terms of the implications of what should be in your shell or how to use it, because we're all different instructors and academic freedom has to be preserved in anything that we do in our teaching, whether DE, face-to-face, or ISP. But maybe some core elements will be available to you as part of your shell. For example, a page on our student discipline policy, a page on our tolerance policy, a page on our plagiarism policy, and so forth. So be on the lookout for that, more to come in the future. And the good news is if we build any of that out, it'll be preset for you in your Canvas shell. You won't have to do anything new, and that's already the case. So when you get your new shell, there are a lot of preset elements like online tutoring and opportunities for free software and so forth. So a lot of that is already built into your shell. And as I mentioned that earlier section about visibility, what's visible to students and not, you can pick and choose those resources as you best see fit as an instructor. I think there has to be some level of redundancy. I know I'm being redundant in already saying this. I'm saying it again. But again, if there's a grade dispute, we want to have on your syllabus clarity in terms of all the elements laid out. If you don't detail your grading policies, your students aren't going to be able to be successful in your class anyway. And then if we do get to the level of a grade dispute or a grievance hearing, we need to have more information rather than less to make a decision. So please, please, please be redundant in your syllabus or in your Canvas shell, even if it seems like, well, I've already said this a million times. It's really important. I mentioned this earlier, but stress behavior expectations. I can jump on here and just show you some of what I have in my Canvas shell here.
Okay, in terms of student behavior and your expectations, I won't say as much today about this because I have 2 additional videos on the subject that I'll mention to you here in a bit. But one of the things I do is in my policies section, have all this information about whether or not I'm accepting late work and so forth. Here's the key one. It's the conduct code. And I talk about I support free speech, but I won't tolerate bullying. And I also include our faculty statement on tolerance and diversity, the student conduct standards. And this is just straight out of our board policy. And if you want this information for your own class, just drop me an email and you can get copies of this. I sent them out recently, but if you didn't receive that, I have it as a PDF as well. Then just let me know. So in addition to just mentioning this from my own Canvas site, I encourage you to look at my 2 videos. One is LTCC DE, Plagiarism, Tolerance, and Student Conduct, and this takes you through some of the approaches you might take to stress these issues in your class. And the second one, which is a little more, I would say, poignant, is this video, Class Controversy, LTCC DE classes. And in this one, I deal with student challenges and I talk about some real situations and how to protect yourself and also to protect your students, because we don't consider enough the fact that an online environment can often be a very hostile one if you have a student or two who get a little bit out of control in terms of their behavior. So we'll do some trainings on this coming up, certainly next year into 2019, 2020, but important to think about including student behavior as a part of your Canvas shell.
Again, it's really protecting yourself, it's protecting your students. I do recommend you watch my video on student behavior. It's called Class Controversy, and that'll give you an opportunity to really think about nipping some of the issues in the bud as they happen or even before they happen by setting some of those expectations before your class actually starts, and then being proactive and turning moments of difficulty or challenges into teachable moments for your other students in the class if there is a behavioral issue that develops over time. Having your assignments, obviously detailed in Canvas, is important. Let me jump into my shell and show you some of my assignments.
All right, in terms of looking at assignments here on Canvas, I won't say too much because of the obvious fact that assignments will vary from class to class, discipline to discipline, and instructor to instructor. So in my own cases, I have typically quizzes or exams. In some cases, these might be objective. They more recently I've been focusing a little more on pure written ones. So you can see in this particular class I have set up, and there's some level of overlap. So if something is a discussion and it's graded, it will appear in the assignments. And so the discussions appear here, and then also the quizzes. So I think you probably already know the functionality here. You can create new groups, and I could say call it essays, I could call it projects, whatever I want to call it. And then I could click on the assignment itself. And there's a lot that you can do in this assignment view. So you can obviously do anything that you would normally do with a page. It has basically the same formatting of a page that you're familiar with creating content for your modules. And then you could also link to files and images. And depending on your assignment groups, you would include that assignment there. This will allow you to choose the type of assignment that it is. And if it's online, of course, you can use everything from a text entry, a website, media recordings, file uploads, and VeriCite, which is our plagiarism detection. And if you're doing a group assignment and peer reviews, like for an English class, it might be handy. This will allow you to create that level of functionality. So very clean, I think, as you expect with Canvas in terms of creating assignments. Again, if you create a discussion board, within that discussion board, often just because you're assigning points to that, it will then automatically default it as a assignment. And the same thing is said then if I go to quiz and I create the quiz there, then that will populate also as an assignment. You could just see my 3 quizzes here. So I can't say too much about this level of your shell or this aspect of your shell because the assignments are really up to you, but in all cases, of course, it's always important to have clear instructions to our students and that they're able to complete their assignments just with what you've given them. So if anything requires an app to complete the assignment, I know a lot of our math and science faculty have this for some of their classes, or if there's something external outside of Canvas, just make sure that whatever it is that they're having to do outside of Canvas, that they have access to that there aren't any issues with the external websites that you're sending them to and so forth.
Again, the level of variation here is huge. We can never be prescriptive about this. We're not going to say you must have quizzes or you should or should not have objective exam questions, or you should only have essays, or you should have papers or group projects. We're never going to get into that level because it's academic freedom and you know what works best in your discipline. But I think, as always, think very carefully about what assignments work best for your discipline and also for the DE format. I will say, coming down the road here, we'll have some additional trainings virtually and on campus. Any on-campus training through my new role, Faculty Chair of Teaching and Learning, will be live streamed through YouTube, so you can participate whether you're a local person in Tahoe or you teach somewhere across the country. And we will have some conversations about what works best in your disciplines, the types of assignments, the content, the approaches, even down to the nitty-gritty of how long should you have an exam open for. There's a lot of conversation about this. Should it be 2 days or 2 hours? A lot of disagreement, but we should have these conversations. So more opportunities to talk about some of this definitely in the future. And then also, we can ask some questions about discussions. Let me jump on board here on Canvas and show you what I do in some of my discussions.
Okay, so in terms of discussions, I'll show you just the basics of what I have set up here. I'm not going to show you student information or anything like that. We'll protect confidentiality, of course, in all cases. This is my introduction board. One of the things I like to do at the beginning of a quarter is to have an introduction. I will give my bio, include my web page, a little bit about my background, and then the students do the same thing. And I typically make this worth not as many points as, say, the traditional discussion assignment because it's a little shorter. It's sometimes like 50 words or so. So that is like the bios introducing students to themselves and the instructor. I also then, for every week, and I've been doing this going back since the beginning of when I've been teaching DE, is I always have my discussions based on weeks. I give the information up here, and in this case 4 discussions, 150 words minimum, please check word count, and I also give the information about the number of points possible and so forth. I'm also very particular about discussion posts that have to be threaded, And so the idea behind this is that if there's one topic like this one here, the students must reply using the reply button below as opposed to the one at the top. If you click the one at the top, of course, it creates a new thread, a new discussion foundation that other students can comment on. I also have this page here, and this is my way of summarizing the types of discussions in one of my classes. I just created this chart on OmniGraffle. And this is what I was talking about before. I basically discussed that there are 3 types of discussions you can do. One is a preset topic, which is my topics that I've set up. The other one is replying to a student topic, and the other one is a new topic that someone creates. And I also give them some recommendations about bolding the topics and so forth. I think we don't maybe spend enough time just holistically thinking about our discussion posts and how to keep order a little bit. For those of us who teach in a discipline that could focus on controversial issues, I've always said it's important to think about maintaining order in that discussion space. It's very easy for people to get off topic. If you're in a sociology class and you're debating abortion or talking about gun rights or something like this, it can very easily get emotional. So in addition to the mechanics and telling students how you want them to post a discussion, like with these threaded replies and so forth, you may really seriously want to consider having a video or some information that talks about your expectations and the expectation of the student to not get out of control and to get emotional and to start engaging in inflammatory behavior in the online format. Again, to go back to my policies, I have a lot of policies here that I list. I have a video that discusses my approaches in the class. I talk about expectations. I go through discussions. I emphasize that, going back to the conduct code and so forth. I also will typically have a Canvas video that describes a lot about the Canvas approach. It might talk about, in this case, threaded discussions, the Canvas app. Embedded in most of these is a conversation about how to approach your discussions in the class. So my big piece of advice for you on this, unsolicited advice, or maybe solicited if you're watching this video, is to not just assume that students know how to navigate a discussion board. So set the rules, set the guidelines, lead by example. The way that you engage in conversation is really an opportunity for teachable moments to other students. And again, I want to emphasize this. I will say it a million times as a broken record because it's so important. We need great instructor presence in our discussions. I do not understand the scenario where you have a discussion board and you don't respond to the discussions. It basically is the same thing as saying you're teaching a class face-to-face and you say to the students, okay, I want you to talk about some issue, and then you leave for the rest of the day, your face-to-face classroom. So I think it's really important to engage the students and to show your expertise as a faculty member in the discipline in which you teach. So when you think about discussions, think about all those issues. And again, it's always, I think, a good idea to think about how you want to organize your discussions and to organize them in a way that makes sense both to you and also to students in terms of their ability to complete their discussion assignments on time.
My main tip to sum this up is to say, try to replicate what you do in a face-to-face class. If you have group work that you do that involves handouts, that involves objects, that involves a short exercise related to a film or a particular approach. If you're teaching art, maybe you do a visual analysis and students respond to that in a group context. Try to replicate that as best as you can in the DE format. If you can't do that, think about maybe reframing your discussion to include something else or to have a different level of focus. So it's something to think about as we build out discussions. As I'm saying in a lot of my other videos in this series, I think your discussion always has to include your instructor presence. You cannot effectively manage a discussion in a class. I've seen this in the past where you set up your discussion and the only individuals commenting on those topics are your fellow students. If you're not engaged as an instructor in that class very rigorously, on a daily basis, I would say at least every few days, why are you teaching the class, right? I mean, it's a basic conversation we need to have, unfortunately, because I think we've gotten into the framework of thinking we can set up discussion boards that are ghost discussion boards, sans the instructor. We need to have instructor presence in those classes And I just personally think it's something we need to do a better job here at LTCC in terms of how we think about class discussions in DE. Let's talk a little bit about announcements next. And I think whether you use announcements, how you use announcements, very much is a matter of your personal preference. Let me show you just some of the approaches I've taken to announcements in one of my DE classes.
Okay, so I think there are two contexts to look at in terms of announcements. One is that you will just obviously want to think about what information you want to convey to your students in your announcements. This shows you my class, and this is the race class from some time back. What I did in this class was early on in the class, as you could see, it started in January. I had a lot of information to the students about read the syllabus, getting started, sensitive topics, to really front load it pretty heavy. So you could see that in the first, almost week of class, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 10 or so announcements. Whereas as you get into the next few weeks of the class for week 1, well, let's take week 2 as a better example. There's maybe only 2 announcements. So I generally would average 2 announcements per week, where I would talk about the tip for the week, that is a tidbit of information about sociology or the subject I was teaching, and then a video. And this was a video that they would click on, and this video would then take them to my overview of that week and giving them the perspective and so forth. So I think you'll have a lot of variation in this depending on what you want to do. One thing you could do, of course, is when you set up your announcements, you could preset your date. And so I could set up the announcement here, and I can choose delay posting, podcast feed, allow liking if you want your students to like it. And if I delay posting, I would then pick the date, the time, and I could essentially have those set up ahead of time, and they will pop in as I want them to pop in, set to the calendar. And I think that's a pretty handy feature, just in the sense that it allows you to stay on top of things and to be organized. So this is the content area for your announcement. If you click this here and click on the trash icon, that will then delete those announcements. And so that's very just much an organizational matter there. You can also search announcements by unread and all. So that's kind of the first area. It's just your content, what you want to include. There's a lot of, I think, different opinions on are announcements effective. When you click on the front page, typically in the course stream, and this class is concluded, so it's not a great example, but in the course stream, it would have that announcement probably showing here under the assignments. It's just not a good example here because it's a concluded class. Now, one thing to consider is that students have the option to set up what information they want to receive, including the announcement information. So if you go to your account, you can click on, you can get it from profile, but click on notifications. And we can all actually do this. And this will say then, and I probably should disable some of these email addresses, but this will say what information is being sent and where. So due dates, grading policies, etc. So I'm offering this because a student can essentially say, all right, I'm going to click these to X, and the X indicates no notifications for those devices. So the challenge there is if you have an announcement you've created for students and they're not maybe directly getting that, does that defeat the purpose of the announcement? So we can't control a lot of that in terms of the notification preferences, but it's something to keep in mind if you are setting up your class and you want to make sure that a student does have an announcement that is getting to them. And one way I do that, I could just show you through my current class. It's always a bit of redundancy, which I mention in this video, is what I try to do is there were some issues I had, say, with the quiz, and I wanted students to look at a video related to a quiz. Okay, I was just looking for it here under week 5. So what I did for that was, because I knew all the students would log on this week and look at the discussion page, I thought I'm going to put this here almost as a quasi-announcement. And so this is like a redundancy. And if I go to my announcements, I also have it as an official announcement. And that is under quiz tips. and I posted that on May 5th. So again, because of the disabling of notifications, I thought I'm going to cover it as well under my discussion. So some level of redundancy may get around some of those issues that you might encounter in terms of announcements, and if they're not maybe being that effective in your class for your students, getting them the content or class information that you want them to receive.
Again, a lot of variation. I'm not going to prescribe to you that there is a better approach to announcements. I think that one challenge I have noted in doing announcements is that sometimes, depending on what the students have set up with their feed, they maybe don't have that announcement as an email, or they have it as an email, but it's not on the right side of their Canvas page in terms of their feed. A lot of that you can't control because the student has an opportunity to decide how he or she wants to interact with some elements of the course, but that can be a bit of a challenge, so maybe don't rely on announcements only as a primary means of communication. If you only had a test announced on your announcement page or a particular announcement, I don't know if that would be effective. You might want to have multiple iterations of that information chunk that you're trying to give to your students in your DE class. The other thing that is kind of important and kind of new is we're rolling out meta majors and guided pathways, and this is a scan of what will be in our upcoming catalog. And it's kind of exciting. So we have 5 different meta majors. I won't say a lot about these because I'm doing actually yet another video on meta majors and how we're rolling these out. I think one question is what's going to happen on campus, or what's going to happen with our DE classes relative to meta majors. I would say in the short term, I'm recording this in 2019, probably not a lot of difference we're going to see in our classes. Over time, we may build out some programmatic stuff institutionally. This may extend to our marketing, our branding, our website. There may be some stuff happening at the department or the 5 meta major levels. As we do that, you might see some stuff pre-built into Canvas, and so that might be part of your Canvas shell. So more is to come about this later, but I want to just put this on your radar because I think that it is something you will see more of in the future in terms of guided pathways and meta majors. Now, one thing that is very important, I think, in any online class is Instructor Presence. I'm not going to offer too much more about this because I just did a video on Instructor Presence, and I'll be sure to link it here on YouTube. The one thing I want to say about this is it's very important to have the level of presence that you would possibly have in a face-to-face class, whether you're teaching ISP or DE. So if you have to use new technologies, if you have to use social media, if you have to use video or interactive apps in your Canvas shell, do those sorts of things to increase your connection with your students. Personalization is a key element of it, and also I would say showing that you're an authority figure in the class, and also that you're empathetic with your students, you're passionate, and you care about their needs and concerns. So Instructor Presence is really key. I personally think we have to improve it a little bit in our DE classes. Using multimedia, social media, and so forth is really key to this. I would also refer you to my recent video on the value of video and how to make some videos and build out some of this technology in your Canvas shell. I've set a goal, or suggested a goal, that if you do a new iteration of a class, add 3 to 4 new multimedia video elements to that class as a personal goal. And then over time, you develop a repository. And when you teach that class through each iteration, you start with 3, you then go to 6, 9, 12. Before you know it, you might have 40 videos as a part of your Canvas shell, as your module structure, and so forth. So opportunities to increase some of our multimedia use in our classes. And I will say that as we think about the basics of teaching DE, the basics of teaching ISP, of face-to-face instruction, as I roll out my new role in faculty chair of teaching and learning, I'll be doing more of these trainings both in person and virtually, and it'll be an opportunity for you to connect with me and have some conversations through our onboarding process of new faculty and through our continuing efforts to train faculty and work with faculty in a collaborative sense here at LTCC to ensure that we have the highest quality faculty, the best trained faculty, and faculty that are so focused on our student needs and teaching their expertise through their disciplines that we know we have a really good approach to teaching and learning here at LTCC. So good luck with your efforts here in Canvas and throughout your instructional career teaching here at Lake Tahoe Community College. And as always, I'll be back with more videos in this and future video series about DE instruction and LTCC teaching and learning issues.